The wrought iron gates of the Finch estate swung inward with a whisper of hydraulics, revealing a driveway that snaked through perfectly manicured desert flora. The air, crisp and thin even in late morning, carried the faint, dry scent of creosote. I eased my unmarked sedan past the patrol cars and the satellite trucks already clustered near the property line, their dishes aimed skyward like metallic sunflowers. Finch, the tech mogul, was a name that commanded attention, even in death. A local detective, a man whose uniform looked a size too snug across his shoulders, met me at the grand entrance. Pathologist Kincaid, extending a hand that felt surprisingly soft. Thanks for coming out so quickly. High profile, you know. Seth, I corrected. A small habit. What do we have? He gestured vaguely towards the vast open foyer, found at the bottom of the main staircase by his personal assistant this morning. Looks like a tragic accident. Head trauma, multiple fractures. He sounded rehearsed, almost eager to close the file. The assistant tried CPR, then called 911. Paramedics confirmed DOA. I nodded, my gaze already sweeping past him, taking in the scene. The house was a testament to extreme wealth and minimalist design. Polished concrete floors stretched endlessly, reflecting the soaring glass walls that offered panoramic views of the distant, hazy mountains. My eyes lingered on the subtle marring. Any witnesses? My voice low. She arrived for her morning brief, found him. No one else was here overnight. The security logs confirm it. Smart home, motion sensors, biometrics, a single breach. The detective puffed out his chest, confident in the integrity of the scene. I moved past him, my shoes making barely a sound on the immaculate floor. The air inside was cool, regulated to an almost sterile perfection, a stark contrast to the raw desert outside. The body lay a few feet from the base of the staircase, partially covered by a white sheet. Don't touch anything yet, I instructed, though the crime scene technicians were already moving with practiced efficiency around the perimeter, photographing, dusting, marking. I pulled on a pair of fresh nitrile gloves, the material stretching taut over my fingers. The detective watched me, a flicker of impatience in his eyes. Happens all the time. Perhaps, I conceded, but my internal register already hummed with discord. But not often with a man who could afford to have his stairs carpeted in spun gold if he so chose. His face was pale, slack, but his features were still sharp, defined. I noted the bruising around his left temple, consistent with a fall, but something else caught my attention. His right wrist was angled unnaturally, a telltale sign of a significant break, yet the skin around it showed no overt abrasion. No corresponding impact point on the floor nearby. The damage was extensive. A severe contusion to the head, certainly lethal on its own, and multiple apparent fractures to the ribs and limbs. Standard for a fall from a height. Fractured, but not in a way that suggested impact with a banister or a step. And the angle of a splintered tibia, visible beneath the torn fabric of his expensive trousers, seemed to curve inward rather than outward from a direct fall. The skin, for all the bruising, lacked the scrapes and abrasions one would expect from a prolonged tumble down a hard surface. It was as if the force had been applied through his clothing, rather than against the exposed skin. The blood, too, seemed to have pooled in a way that suggested a settled position, not the dynamic, spreading pattern of a body still moving after impact. A faint, almost imperceptible residue clung to the cuff of his shirt, a fine, crystalline dust that glittered under the harsh forensic lights. It wasn't plaster, wasn't concrete dust. It was too uniform, too precise. My mind, a database of countless traumas and countless deaths, flagged it immediately. Something wrong? I didn't answer immediately. My eyes traced the barely visible, almost symmetrical marks on Finch's forearms, almost like a faint impression. Not a bruise, a defensive wound, but something else. A fall, even a fatal one, often leaves a trail, a disturbance beyond the immediate impact. The official narrative of a simple, tragic accident already felt brittle in my hands, threatening to shatter. My mind, trained to see beyond the obvious, began to construct an alternate, far more disturbing picture. Miles away, cloaked by the vast, indifferent expanse of the desert, a small, nondescript safe house pulsed with a low, rhythmic hum. Each count was precise, each stack perfect. I stood up slowly, the scent of antiseptic and something metallic, like old pennies, clinging to my gloves. "No," I finally said, turning to the detective, my voice firm. "Something is very wrong here." The sterile scent of disinfectant and formaldehyde clung to the air, a familiar, almost comforting perfume in my line of work. The crime scene, with its polished surfaces and the detective's dismissive tone, had been a prelude. Now, in the stark white light of the autopsy suite, the real work began. Finch lay before me, no longer a tech mogul, just a cadaver waiting to yield its secrets. My gaze returned to the forearms. The faint, almost symmetrical impressions I'd noted earlier were still there, barely discernible against the pallor of his skin. They looked more like pressure points, as if something had gripped him, briefly, firmly, without breaking the surface. I made a mental note, already dictating observations into the overhead microphone. Apparent cause of death: blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with a fall from height. External examination reveals. I systematically documented every detail. The contusions on his scalp, the lacerations, all seemed to fit the narrative of an uncontrolled descent onto a hard surface. But my gut, that persistent, nagging intuition, told me otherwise. The detective, convinced of a simple accident, had wanted a quick sign-off. I wasn't in the business of quick sign-offs. His expensive suit jacket, the silk tie, the custom-made shirt. As I peeled back the layers, I ran my gloved fingers over the fabric, feeling for anything unusual. My eyes, trained over decades to spot the almost invisible, caught it. Minute, almost translucent strands, not typical clothing fibers, clinging to the lapel of his jacket and the cuff of his shirt. They shimmered faintly under the high-intensity lights, a pearlescent sheen that seemed out of place. I carefully collected them with forensic tweezers, placing them into a separate labeled vial. Unidentified fibers, into the microphone. Present on outerwear and inner shirt sleeve. Microscopic analysis required. Next, the skin. I used a UV light, sweeping it across She's body. No telltale glow of biological fluids or common chemical agents. But then, as I angled the light just so, over the inner forearm where those faint impressions lay, I detected a subtle, almost imperceptible sheen. It wasn't sweat, nor was it residual moisture. It was a faint, almost oily film that didn't quite evaporate. I took multiple swabs, from the forearms, the back of his neck, the collar of his shirt. Faint, unidentifiable chemical residue collected from skin and clothing, I dictated. Requires full spectrometry analysis. With the external observations complete, I began the internal examination. The skull fracture was significant, a stellate pattern on the parietal bone, consistent with a severe impact. Brain hemorrhaging, cerebral contusions. Textbook findings for a fatal fall. The local police would likely consider this sufficient. My scalpel moved with practiced precision, opening the chest cavity, revealing the organs. Everything appeared relatively normal, no obvious organ damage beyond what could be attributed to the impact or post-mortem changes. It was when I began the skeletal examination that the true anomalies began to emerge. I methodically checked each bone for fractures. The ribs were intact, as were most of the vertebrae, surprising given the force implied by the head injury. But as I worked my way down to the long bones, I felt it. A subtle, almost imperceptible give beneath my fingers. Not a clean break, but a series of minute, almost hairline fractures. I started with the femurs. Under a magnifying lamp, I could discern faint branching lines, like tiny spiderwebs etched into the cortical bone. weren't the sharp, jagged lines of a direct impact fracture. Were microfractures, small, almost stress-like, distributed along the shafts, particularly near the mid-diaphysis. I checked the tibias, the humeri, the radii, and ulnus. Multiple, tiny fractures, disproportionate to the single massive impact to the head. A fall, even a severe one, usually produces a localized impact fracture, perhaps radiating cracks. But this widespread pattern of microfractures in multiple long bones? It spoke of a different kind of force, something that had weakened or stressed the skeletal structure before the final fatal blow. It was too widespread, too subtle to be explained by a single fall. Multiple microfractures observed in bilateral femurs, tibias, humeri, radii, and ulnus, I dictated, my voice tight with controlled urgency. Fracture patterns are atypical for blunt force trauma from a single impact. Suggests pre-existing skeletal stress or a unique mechanism of injury prior to final impact. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. The humming of the ventilation system seemed to amplify the silence. This was something far more deliberate, far more insidious. Had wanted Finch dead, and they had gone to extraordinary lengths to make it look like something it wasn't. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. Had wanted she dead, and they had gone to extraordinary lengths to make it look like something it wasn't. I leaned closer to the eyepiece of the stereo microscope, adjusting the focus dial with a practiced thumb and forefinger. On the slide, nestled amongst a few strands of Finch's own hair, was a microscopic filament. It was almost translucent, glinting faintly under the focused halogen light, barely thicker than a spider silk, yet possessing an unusual, almost crystalline sheen. Any luck with the fibers, Kincaid? The question came from, in trace evidence, standing by a bank of gas chromatographs. She held a printout, her brow furrowed. Still waiting for the elemental analysis, my gaze fixed. But just visually, this isn't cotton. It's not even a common synthetic blend I recognize. Exactly, she confirmed, approaching my station. Our preliminary FTIR results are odd. The spectral signature doesn't match anything in our standard databases, or even the expanded commercial textile libraries. We ran it against Xi's entire wardrobe inventory, his upholstery, his carpets. It's a complete outlier. I lifted my head, rubbing my eyes. An outlier found embedded in the dermal layers around the impact site. That makes it significant. The fibers were too small to be visible to the naked eye, requiring careful scraping and collection. Their presence there and their unique composition was my first tangible deviation from the accidental fall narrative. They weren't from Finch's clothes, nor his environment. They came from something else. My attention shifted to the chemical residue. The samples had been meticulously collected from the same area as the fibers, a faint, almost imperceptible film that had resisted initial swabbing efforts and only revealed itself under specific UV wavelengths. The early mass spectrometry runs were still processing, but the initial reports were even more perplexing than the fibers. And the residue? Turning to another colleague, a forensic chemist who was hunched over a workstation, surrounded by digital readouts. That's the real head-scratcher, Seth, he grumbled, pushing his safety glasses up his nose. We are seeing multiple organic compounds, some with extremely high molecular weights, but they're not forming any recognizable structure. No protein chains, no common polymers. It's like a partial breakdown product of something we don't have a reference for. It's resisting initial identification, acting more like a slurry of disparate components than a single substance. A slurry that was deposited on Xi's skin just before or during the trauma. More to myself than to them. The implication was clear. Both the unique fibers and this baffling chemical residue were foreign elements introduced at the critical moment. I moved away from the stereo microscope, walking over to a large monitor displaying high-resolution scans of Finch's skeletal structure. The microfractures were my current obsession. The local police had dismissed them as typical of a fall from height, but my pathologist's eye saw something else. I zoomed in on the humerus, then the ribs. There were indeed the characteristic spiral fractures and compression breaks consistent with blunt force trauma from a fall. But beneath those, deeper, almost imperceptible, were other finer lines. Hairline cracks that seemed to predate the major breaks. I spent hours tracing them with a digital stylus, enhancing contrast, rotating the 3D models. Was I seeing patterns where none existed? Or was this the subtle signature of a pre-existing injury? Or perhaps a different kind of impact? An impact that weakened the bone before the fall, making the subsequent trauma appear more severe and accidental? The idea was audacious, but it gnawed at me. The bone tissue around these microfractures also showed faint, almost crystalline deposits, correlating with the residue samples. Could it be a substance designed to weaken bone? It sounded like something out of a pulp novel, but the evidence was screaming at me. On a scarred metal table, a portable money counter whirred, spitting out crisp $100 bills into a neat stack. The rhythmic thwip, thwip, thwip of the machine was the only sound in the sparsely furnished room, punctuated by the faint, distant howl of the wind. A laptop sat open on a nearby crate, its screen displaying a news report about the ongoing investigation into Xi's death. The headline still read, "Tragic Accident." The stranger smiled, a fleeting, almost imperceptible twitch of the lips. Back in the lab, I leaned back from the monitor, my eyes gritty. The image of the microfractures swam before me. The fibers, the residue, the subtle bone trauma. Together, they painted a picture of intent. I knew the answers were hidden in these minute details, waiting for me to connect them. I just had to keep digging. The hum of the mass spectrometer had become a constant companion, a low thrum against the sterile quiet of the lab. My eyes, still gritty from the previous night, were glued to the oscillating peaks on the monitor. Each curve, each dip, was a whisper from the dead, and I was straining to hear its story. The microfractures in Finch's bones, the peculiar residue, the subtle cellular degradation. They had been individual threads. Now I needed to weave them into a coherent tapestry. I toggled between screens. Spectral analysis of the residue scraped from the impact site on the skull, magnified views of the bone trauma, and a comparative analysis of healthy bone tissue. The initial police report had cited the fall, a simple, tragic misstep. But my gut, that ever-present internal compass, pointed away from simplicity. The pattern of the fractures just didn't sit right. A fall from that height onto that surface should have produced more catastrophic uniform trauma. Instead, I saw a network of delicate, almost spiderweb-like cracks radiating from the primary impact points, as if the bone had been brittle, not merely struck. My fingers danced across the keyboard, isolating the specific molecular signatures from the residue. I cross-referenced them against known biological and chemical compounds. The database whirred, processing millions of entries. Minutes stretched into an eternity. A perfect one, but close enough to trigger a red flag. I refined the search parameters, focusing on organic compounds with a high affinity for calcium. The screen refreshed, and a new list appeared. My gaze snagged on an entry. A synthetic analog, designed to disrupt osteoblast activity and accelerate decalcification. This wasn't just a chemical. It was a weapon, designed to compromise skeletal integrity without leaving an obvious external mark. My mind raced, connecting the dots. The subtle, almost imperceptible microfractures, previously dismissed as secondary trauma, now screamed their true nature. They weren't caused by the fall. They were pre-existing conditions, symptoms of bones that had been significantly compromised before impact. His skeleton had been prepared for it. His bones, solid structures of life, had been turned into fragile porcelain. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, a calculated, insidious act designed to mimic a tragic mishap. Hadn't just pushed Xi, they had chemically primed him for destruction. I snatched my phone, my fingers fumbling slightly as I dialed the lead detective's number. "Detective," I said, my voice tight with urgency. "I need you to come back to the lab. Finch's death, it's not an accident. It's murder." Within the hour, the lead detective, a man whose face was perpetually etched with the weight of the world, stood beside me, peering at the monitors. "This agent," I explained, my voice steady despite the tremor of discovery still running through me. "It acts rapidly. A targeted dose could have been administered hours, even minutes before the fall. It wouldn't show up on a standard toxicology screen unless specifically looked for, and its effects on the bone would be subtle enough to be missed without extreme magnification and chemical analysis." The detective leaned closer to the screen, his eyes tracing the spiderweb fractures. "So he wasn't pushed off a ledge with a solid frame," he murmured, the implications sinking in. "He was pushed off with a body already primed to shatter." "Precisely," I confirmed. "The impact, while significant, was the final act, created the vulnerability, making the fall lethal in a way it otherwise wouldn't have been." The air in the lab grew heavy, charged with the shift in the case. She's death, once a closed file, had burst wide open, revealing a far more sinister narrative. The detective straightened, his gaze now distant, already formulating new strategies. "This changes everything," he stated, his voice flat with the magnitude of the revelation. "Get a report drafted immediately, Seth. This needs to go to the brass. We're looking at a premeditated homicide, a very sophisticated one." Later, after the detective had left, leaving a quiet wake of renewed tension, I sat back at my workstation, the hum of the equipment a dull backdrop to my racing thoughts. Who had access to such? And why use such an elaborate, almost theatrical method? A notification flashed on my secure communication channel, an encrypted file from an unknown source. I hesitated for a moment, then clicked it open. It contained a single, grainy satellite image, dated less than 24 hours ago. The image depicted a nondescript building, stark and isolated, deep in what appeared to be a desert landscape. Below the image, an audio file played. Through the tinny speakers, I heard a low, rhythmic whirring sound, unmistakable in its cadence. A portable money counter, efficiently processing stacks of currency. The sound was accompanied by a faint, almost subliminal murmur of voices, too indistinct to make out. My gaze flickered from the desert safehouse image to the empty chair where the detective had just sat. This wasn't just about Finch anymore. This was a network, a hidden operation, and it was just beginning to reveal itself. The secure comms notification from the previous night had been cryptic, a single, untraceable coordinate and a time. It led me, not to another sterile lab or a hushed police station, but to a place far from the city's concrete sprawl. I navigated the rental vehicle through miles of arid scrubland, the sun a relentless hammer against the windshield. Dust devils danced in the distance, spectral figures against the pale sky. I found the safe house tucked into a fold of sun-baked rock, a nondescript structure that blended seamlessly with the ochre landscape. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and something metallic. A portable money counter, a discreet gray box, hummed softly on a scarred wooden table, its digital display flickering with a meaningless sequence of zeros. Its presence here, in this desolate outpost, felt like a scene ripped from a pulpy thriller. A stark contrast to the precise world of forensic science I usually inhabited. A large, burly man, his face a roadmap of hard living, nodded curtly from a shadowed corner. He was the contact, the gatekeeper to the informant. He gestured towards a heavy steel case on the table. "Payment first." I swallowed, the dryness in my throat mirroring the desert outside. This was a deviation, a leap of faith I wouldn't normally take, but the official channels were moving too slowly, too predictably. The decalcifying agent I'd identified had indeed shifted the police's focus. The detective had called me earlier, his voice clipped, confirming that their initial inquiries were now centered on Xi's corporate rivals, specifically those with the resources and motive to develop such a sophisticated bioweapon. They saw the how as a means to an end, a signature of a particular kind of enemy. But I still couldn't shake the nagging sensation that something fundamental was being missed. It was elaborate, almost theatrical, as I'd thought before. Why such an intricate biological attack when a simpler, more direct approach might have sufficed for a professional hit? It spoke of a killer who enjoyed the complexity, or perhaps one who needed to obscure something else entirely. That subtle anomaly in the skeletal trauma, the precise way the bone had fragmented before the fall, it still haunted me. The decalcifying agent explained the fragility, but not the impact point, without a visible external force. While the money counter continued its monotonous count, each crisp bill a testament to my desperation, my mind drifted back to the samples. I had retrieved the tissue slides from the lab before coming here, a small, discreet package tucked into my internal jacket pocket. I needed to look again, away from the sterile but also scrutinizing eyes of my colleagues. The informant, a gaunt woman with eyes that darted constantly, arrived 20 minutes later, emerging from the shimmering heat like a mirage. She took the stacks of cash without a word, her fingers surprisingly delicate as she stacked them. Finch was developing a counteragent, for the decalcifier itself, but for something it enabled. She paused, her gaze locking onto mine, a flicker of genuine fear in their depths. Something that targets cellular memory, a ghost in the machine, designed to erase traces of its own use and maybe more. Cellular memory, designed to erase its own tracks. That would explain the meticulous nature, the absence of other obvious markers. But it also threw a wrench into everything I thought I knew about the decalcifier. I returned to my own small, temporary setup in the safe house, a portable microscope and a few trays of slides. The humming money counter in the other room, a constant, unsettling counterpoint. The informant's words echoed in my mind. Something that targets cellular memory. I focused the lens on a section of epidermal tissue from Xi's upper arm, an area that had shown no visible trauma. My fingers, steady despite the internal tremor, adjusted the fine focus knob. I scanned the familiar landscape of keratinocytes, melanocytes, the occasional hair follicle. I was looking for anything out of place, anything that didn't belong. Just the expected cellular debris, the microscopic world of a deceased human. I adjusted the lighting, increased the magnification, pushing the limits of the optical resolution. My eyes burned, but I refused to blink. A cluster, not a fragment of tissue, but a single isolated cell. It was smaller than the surrounding epidermal cells, its nucleus denser, its cytoplasm slightly more granular. It didn't look like a contaminant from the lab, nor did it match Finch's own cellular morphology I had meticulously documented. A single foreign skin cell. It was clinging to the surface, almost invisible amidst the larger, more robust cells of Xi's own body. Small to be seen with the naked eye, too isolated to be dismissed as environmental contamination. This wasn't a casual transfer. This was a residue of contact. The decalcifying agent, the elaborate fall, the potential cellular memory weapon. All of it pointed to a meticulously planned, almost surgical assassination. But this cell, this single microscopic piece of foreign biological matter, suggested a human element. A moment of proximity that the killer had failed to account for. The killer wasn't just a faceless entity deploying a sophisticated bioweapon from a distance. Had been close enough to Finch to leave a trace. Had touched him, however fleetingly, before his staged demise. And that person, whoever they were, had left behind a piece of themselves, a silent testament to their presence. The desert outside felt less desolate, more watchful. Just the cellular architecture, but the subtle deviations, the microscopic scars, the chemical whispers left behind. My eye, trained over decades, finally caught it. A faint, iridescent sheen clinging to a cluster of keratinocytes, almost imperceptible against the natural oils and cellular debris. It wasn't a biological contaminant. I worked meticulously, isolating the affected tissue, a sliver thinner than a human hair. The process of extracting any viable genetic material from such a minute sample, especially one exposed to whatever chemical agent had caused Xi's skeletal trauma, was painstaking. Days blurred into nights spent hunched over the microscope, then moving to the sequencing lab, the hum of the machines a constant companion. My hands, usually steady, felt a new kind of tremor. Not of fear, but of anticipation, of being on the precipice of something significant. The results, when they finally came back, were both a triumph and a disconcerting jolt. The DNA profile was complete, robust, and unambiguous. It belonged to an individual named Elias, a former lead engineer at Finch's company, Alistair Tech. He'd been publicly fired 2 years prior after a bitter dispute over intellectual property, claiming she had stolen his designs. The fallout had been spectacular, splashed across tech blogs and financial news, culminating in vowing vengeance in a particularly venomous online manifesto. "Well, Kincaid," the detective said, his voice brimming with satisfaction, "looks like we have our man." He stood in my lab, an uncharacteristic smirk playing on his lips, holding the preliminary report like a trophy. Motive, opportunity, and now your magic DNA. Case closed, wouldn't you say? I leaned back from my workstation, the sterile scent of the lab suddenly feeling cloying. It's certainly a compelling lead, Detective. A direct match is irrefutable. I watched him, measuring his reaction, the almost giddy relief that had settled over him. He wanted this to be over. I understood the pressure, the public eye scrutinizing every move on a high-profile case. But something felt off, a discordant note in an otherwise perfect symphony of evidence. The guy swore he'd ruin Finch. She is dead, and his DNA is on him. We're moving to pick him up. The detective gestured emphatically with the report, then glanced at his watch. You found what we needed. He turned to leave, already mentally drafting the press release. Detective, I called, stopping him at the door. If was so intent on revenge and capable of infiltrating Finch's highly secured home, why would he use such an elaborate chemical agent to induce skeletal trauma, only to then leave a direct DNA sample on Xi's arm? Almost too convenient. He paused, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. Or maybe he wanted us to know it was him. Was known for his meticulous, almost obsessive attention to detail in his engineering work. The complexity of the chemical agent I'd observed, the way it had targeted the bone structure while leaving soft tissue largely intact, spoke of a highly sophisticated, almost surgical approach. Unless it wasn't inadvertent at all. This felt like a red herring, brilliantly laid. The kind of setup designed to be found, to steer the investigation down a neatly paved path. I couldn't shake the feeling that the real killer, the one who orchestrated the chemical attack, was still out there, watching, perhaps even enjoying the police's swift conclusion. Later that evening, the city lights a distant glow against the horizon. I found myself on a dusty, unpaved road. The tires of my borrowed vehicle kicking up plumes of fine sand. The GPS on my phone was barely holding a signal, pointing me toward a remote coordinates in the middle of nowhere. He'd insisted on this secluded location, citing unwanted ears. The air grew heavy with the scent of sagebrush and dry earth. Eventually, a squat, windowless structure emerged from the twilight, a single weak bulb illuminating a dented metal door. This was it. A desert safe house, far from any prying eyes. As I approached the door, a low, rhythmic hum reached me, a sound I recognized instantly. Inside, through the thin metal, I could hear it more clearly. The rapid, precise whirring of a portable money counter, churning through stacks of bills. It was a sound that spoke of transactions, of secrets bought and sold, of lines being crossed. My contact had certainly kept busy since leaving official forensics. You made it, the contact said, his voice raspy. He stepped aside, allowing me entry. The interior was Spartan. A single table, a few folding chairs, and on the table, a compact industrial-grade money counter, its display still showing a staggering figure. Stacks of bundled currency lay beside it. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and something metallic, like ozone. My gaze lingered on the stacks of money, then on his face, searching for answers beyond the convenient ones. The sudden silence was a stark contrast to the rattling journey. Outside, the twilight deepened, painting the distant mesas in shades of bruised plum and charcoal. I sat for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the gloom beyond the windshield. The only sound now the faint, rhythmic hum of a portable money counter emanating from inside the squat, windowless structure ahead. The scent of sagebrush and dry earth, so pervasive on the drive, now mingled with something else. A metallic tang, faint, almost imperceptible, but enough to prickle my professional senses. I pushed open the truck door, the groan of hinges echoing in the vast emptiness. The air was cool, carrying no hint of recent rain, just the arid breath of the desert. My boots crunched on loose gravel as I approached the dented metal door, my hand instinctively going to the small, discreet evidence kit I always carried. Even on these unsanctioned excursions, it held the most perplexing anomalies from the Finch scene, the kind of details that gnawed at me. A click. Then the door creaked inward, revealing silhouetted against a dim interior light. Kincaid? The informant's voice was a low rumble, devoid of inflection. Took you long enough. Traffic, I deadpanned, stepping over the threshold. The safe house was Spartan. A single folding table, 2 chairs, and a stack of nondescript crates against one wall. On the table, beneath the weak glow of a bare bulb, sat the money counter, its green digital display flashing a rapidly climbing figure. The informant, a man of few words and even fewer visible emotions, gestured vaguely towards a chair. His attention was split between the machine and the secure tablet he held, its screen casting a blue sheen on his impassive face. "You have what I asked for?" Cutting to the chase. I wasn't here for pleasantries. He nodded, tapping the tablet. "You brought your own distractions, I see." His gaze flickered to the small kit in my hand. My mind was already miles away, back in Xi's meticulously designed smart home, revisiting the scene in my head. The skeletal trauma, the decalcifying agent, and then those fibers. They had been an afterthought initially, just another data point in a sea of evidence, but they refused to settle into any conventional category. They were too clean, too uniform, too alien to the domestic environment. I set the kit on the corner of the table, pulling out the sealed bag containing the fiber samples. They were microscopic, almost invisible to the naked eye, but under the small, portable magnification lens I carried, they shimmered with a subtle synthetic sheen. I had logged them as unusual synthetic strands, a placeholder until I could run a more thorough analysis. The local lab had flagged them as non-standard, a type they couldn't immediately identify with common apparel or household textiles. That alone was a red flag. "I need access to your specialized material science databases," pushing the bag across the table towards the informant. "Specifically the secure ones for industrial and advanced research applications." He grunted, pausing the money counter with a decisive tap. He looked at the fiber samples, then at me. A flicker of something unreadable in his eyes before he slid his tablet across the table. "My time is money, Kincaid." I didn't waste a second. My fingers flew across the tablet's interface, navigating through a labyrinth of encrypted menus. The databases I sought weren't public, nor were they accessible to standard police forensics. Were proprietary, often classified repositories of materials used in niche, high-security industries. I uploaded the spectral analysis data I'd already performed on the fibers, along with detailed micrographs. My search parameters were tight. Synthetic polymers, sterile application, high tensile strength, non-degradable specific molecular markers. The initial results were a deluge, but with each refinement, the list dwindled. My brow furrowed in concentration, my internal monologue a rapid-fire cross-examination of each potential match. This wasn't just a random fragment of clothing. Its structure suggested purpose, design, a direct match, but a family of materials, a specific class of polymer composites. The system highlighted several entries, each leading to a more detailed profile. I clicked through, my breath catching in my throat as the descriptions materialized on the screen. High-grade, sterile cleanroom suits. The words jumped out at me, stark against the digital background. The associated imagery showed figures encased head to toe in pristine, almost futuristic garments, operating in hyper-controlled environments. The material specifications detailed advanced filtration, particle containment, and resistance to biological and chemical agents. Weren't just for manufacturing microchips. These were for facilities handling pathogens, advanced pharmaceuticals, bioweapons research. My mind raced, connecting the dots with a speed that was both exhilarating and terrifying. The bone decalcifying agent, a chemical weapon, effectively, combined with fibers from a cleanroom suit designed for biological and chemical containment. This wasn't a desperate act of violence. The implications hit me with the force of a physical blow. Finch hadn't been killed by some opportunistic thief or a disgruntled business rival wielding a blunt object. He had been taken down by someone operating with scientific precision, someone with access to highly specialized equipment and materials, someone who understood how to eliminate a target while leaving almost no conventional trace. This was an assassination, executed by a perpetrator who moved through the world of advanced research and high-security protocols. I looked up from the tablet, meeting the informant's gaze. The stakes had just escalated dramatically, from corporate intrigue to something with global implications. And I, Seth Kincaid, was now standing directly in its path. My fingers, still raw from the previous day's examinations, danced across the illuminated tablet. The proprietary databases, a digital catacomb of specialized compounds and their often unregistered applications, slowly yielded fragments of information. I sifted through schematics for advanced material degradation agents, cross-referenced with biological vectors, searching for any mention of the compound I'd isolated from Xi's remains. The decalcifying agent was a marvel of targeted molecular design, but its presence felt overt for a killer who had otherwise moved with spectral silence. The screen's cool glow was the only consistent light in the desert safehouse. Outside, the night was a vast, inky canvas, punctuated by the occasional cry of a nocturnal predator. Inside, the air conditioning unit hummed a low, mechanical tune, competing with the rhythmic whir-click-thump of a portable money counter in the corner of the room. I hadn't asked about the counter, nor had the contact who'd arranged this clandestine workspace offered any explanation. It was just another discordant note in the symphony of this investigation, a constant reminder that I was operating far outside the lines of conventional forensics. I leaned back, rubbing the grit from my eyes. The data suggested the decalcifying agent could, in sufficient concentration, induce a localized osteomalacia, a softening of the bone. It explained the unusual fracture patterns, the way Finch's femur had splintered with less force than expected. But something nagged at me. Why go to such elaborate lengths to weaken a bone before a fall, when a simple push would suffice? Unless the fall itself wasn't the primary event. My mind replayed the scene. She, alone, secured in his smart home, succumbing to a fall. The initial assessment, a tragic accident. The decalcifying agent provided a plausible, albeit complex, explanation for the severity of the trauma, obscuring the true cause. It was a forensic sleight of hand. The more I considered it, the more convinced I became. The decalcifying agent was a sophisticated distraction, a red herring designed to draw the eye, to explain away the fall, and to ensure the investigation stopped there. If that was true, then Finch was already incapacitated, perhaps even dead, before he hit the ground. The real weapon, the primary cause of death, had to be something far more elusive. something designed to leave no obvious trace, something that would mimic a natural, sudden collapse. I pushed away from the tablet, the chair scraping against the concrete floor. My portable lab, a marvel of miniaturized analytical equipment, was set up on a folding table nearby. The samples, previously deemed unremarkable after initial pathology, now demanded a second, far more meticulous look. I started with the cardiac tissue, mounting a sliver onto a slide. Under the powerful magnification of my modified field microscope, the myocardial cells looked relatively normal. No widespread necrosis, no inflammatory infiltrate that would signal a conventional toxin or a prolonged ischemic event. But I wasn't looking for conventional. I switched filters, adjusted the lighting, and applied a series of highly specific fluorescent markers, each designed to bind to particular cellular structures or protein signatures. The hum of the money counter was a constant, irritating companion to the delicate work. Minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. My eyes ached, scanning every microscopic field, every cellular junction. And then I saw it. A direct presence, no distinct foreign particle or crystalline structure. Instead, it was a subtle distortion, a faint, almost imperceptible haziness within the synaptic clefts of a few scattered nerve endings embedded in the cardiac tissue. A slight, irregular swelling of the mitochondria, an unusual clumping of neurotransmitter vesicles, weren't overt signs of cellular death, but rather indicators of extreme stress, of a sudden, catastrophic disruption of normal cellular function. I moved to the brainstem samples, the same anomalous patterns repeating themselves, more pronounced here. The neuronal cell bodies appeared intact, but the dendritic spines, the tiny protrusions that receive synaptic input, showed a peculiar, almost ghostly pallor. And within the nuclei of some glial cells, a faint diffuse fluorescence like a dying ember. This wasn't a conventional poison. One engineered to induce a rapid, irreversible systemic shutdown, mimicking a sudden, catastrophic cardiac event or a massive stroke. Finch wouldn't have felt pain, wouldn't have had time to react. He would have simply collapsed, the fall a secondary, obscuring consequence. The decalcifying agent, then, wasn't just a distraction. It was a brilliant, cruel misdirection. It ensured that even if a full autopsy was performed, the focus would be on the dramatic bone trauma, the cause of the fall, diverting attention from the true, invisible killer. The killer was a ghost, and they'd almost gotten away with the perfect murder. The desert safe house was stark, utilitarian, a temporary haven far from prying eyes and official protocols. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of sunlight piercing the grimy window, illuminating the makeshift lab setup I'd cobbled together on a folding table. This was where the real work happened, unburdened by bureaucratic red tape. I'd run the molecular signature of the suspected neurotoxin, a highly modified peptide variant I'd painstakingly isolated from She's neural tissue. Its structure was elegant, insidious, designed for rapid degradation, leaving minimal traces. The search results were sparse, hinting at highly classified research, but one name kept surfacing in the periphery. A doctor unknown. Her published works, though carefully redacted in public journals, showed a clear trajectory towards advanced biochemical synthesis, particularly in the realm of targeted cellular disruption. The bone trauma in Finch's skeleton wasn't a simple fracture. It was a structural compromise, a localized erosion that mimicked extreme blunt force. My analysis had pointed to a specific potent chelating compound, designed not merely to dissolve calcium but to rapidly weaken the collagen matrix itself. Again, Petrova's name appeared, linked to experimental studies on biomaterial degradation for industrial applications. A clever cover, I suspected, for more sinister pursuits. The database cross-referenced her patents, some still pending, which detailed novel methods for manipulating mineralized tissues. The pieces were starting to slot into place, an unnerving pattern emerging. The clean room fibers, microscopic strands recovered from She's clothing, almost invisible, but distinct. They were a synthetic polymer, engineered for extreme durability and resistance to biological contamination. the kind used in highly controlled environments. My search parameters focused on manufacturing facilities and research labs equipped with Class 100 clean rooms or higher. The results were immediate, pointing to a handful of cutting-edge bioweapons research facilities, one of which was a subsidiary of BioSolutions, a direct rival to Finch's own tech empire. And who headed their advanced biochemistry division? The money counter's rhythm paused, then resumed with a crisp, whir-thump, whir-thump, reminding me of the precariousness of my current situation. I ignored it, my focus absolute. The final damning piece of the puzzle was the skin cell. A single microscopic epidermal fragment, almost lost amidst the environmental debris I'd collected. I'd managed to extract a viable DNA profile, a partial sequence, enough to run against limited private databases. Official channels would have taken weeks, months, or been blocked entirely. But I had my own resources, my own network of specialists who operated in the gray areas. The results flashed on the screen. A partial match, but undeniable. The sequence was identical to a sample privately logged years ago during a high-security clearance background check for a prominent scientist. The name displayed beneath the genetic markers sent a cold jolt down my spine, even though I'd already anticipated it. Her profile materialized on the screen, culled from a dozen disparate sources. A prodigy in advanced biochemistry, with a specialized focus on bioweapons research, she had been a rising star at BioSolutions. Her academic history was impeccable, littered with accolades, but a subtle undercurrent of ambition, almost obsession, was evident in her career trajectory. She, Finch, had publicly humiliated her years ago, blocking a major research grant he deemed unethical, effectively sabotaging her most ambitious project. This wasn't just a killer. This was a weaponized mind, meticulously planning, executing with surgical precision. She had left almost no obvious trace, confident in her scientific mastery, confident that her methods were beyond the scope of conventional forensics. She hadn't accounted for someone willing to look beyond the obvious, to dismantle the impossible. I wasn't chasing a common criminal. I was pursuing a ghost, a phantom of intellect and malice. The desert wind howled faintly outside, a desolate sound. The money counter continued its relentless count, a stark reminder of the illicit nature of my pursuit. I had a name, a face, a motive. But unmasking her was only the beginning. Proving it, in a way that would stand up to the might of BioSolutions and the cunning of Lena Petrova, would be the true challenge. And it suddenly felt like the desert safe house wasn't safe enough. The insistent rhythmic whir of the portable money counter was a strangely comforting presence in the stark desert safe house. It worked through the last stack of unmarked bills, a final mundane task before the real work began. I leaned back from the glowing monitor, the schematics for advanced filtration systems still visible, but my focus had shifted. The intricate web of corporate malfeasance and biological engineering had finally coalesced into a single, undeniable truth. For weeks, I had followed the faintest echoes of a killer's passage. A trail that began with She's fractured skull and ended in the sterile labs of a high-tech bioweapons firm. The local authorities had seen a tragic accident. I had seen precision, intent, and a carefully constructed illusion of natural decay. My fingers brushed the edge of a thick file, its contents a meticulously indexed narrative of my findings. The unique pattern of skeletal microfractures. The subtle biological markers that hinted at an accelerated cellular degradation, the airborne dispersal mechanism, the corporate rivalries, the meticulously crafted neurotoxin designed to mimic natural organ failure. Every piece, from the cellular level up, pointed to Dr. Unknown. The hum of the money counter ceased, replaced by a soft click. The last of the funds, discreetly sourced to finance my off-grid operations, were tallied. My eyes scanned the printouts spread across the reinforced table. Spectral analyses, electron microscope images, protein sequencing data. An irrefutable chain of forensic evidence, each link forged in the furnace of meticulous observation and advanced analytical techniques. The journey from the safe house to the secure government facility was a blur of desert highway and silent anticipation. The vast, empty landscape outside the armored vehicle's window offered no solace, only a stark reminder of the isolation I'd embraced to reach this point. The lead detective, a man whose skepticism had slowly given way to grudging respect, sat opposite me, his gaze fixed on the passing scenery. "She's been brought in." His voice flat, confident, almost serene. I nodded, not needing to ask who she was. That confidence was her undoing. It was born of a belief in her own untraceability, a conviction that her weapon was invisible, her method flawless. We arrived at a low, unassuming building, its concrete facade blending seamlessly with the surrounding scrubland. Inside, the corridors were functional, austere. The conference room where the confrontation would take place was equally Spartan. A polished table, half a dozen chairs, and a one-way mirror dominating an entire wall. Petrova was already seated, flanked by her legal representative. Her posture was erect, her expression calm, almost bored. She looked utterly in control, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her tailored suit impeccable. "Petrova," the lead detective began, his voice devoid of inflection. "Kincaid has some information to share regarding the death of Finch." Her eyes, the color of glacial ice, flicked to me. There was a flicker of something, perhaps mild curiosity, but no fear, no surprise. She offered a small, polite smile. "I've already cooperated fully with all inquiries, Detective." My voice was level, betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through me. Finch's death was no accident. Doctor Unknown. It was a carefully orchestrated murder, designed to look like one. But words are not evidence. "Indeed," I agreed, placing my file on the table with a soft thud. "But these are not just words." I began, methodically, to lay out my case. I started with the microfractures in Shee's skull, explaining how the impact site, initially attributed to a fall, revealed a concentric pattern inconsistent with simple blunt force trauma. The precise angle of impact, the velocity required, the specific micro-shearing in the bone structure. It indicated a deliberate, focused strike, not a random tumble down a staircase. Her lawyer shifted, but a pathologist's interpretation, a hint of dismissiveness in her tone. "A forensic pathologist's interpretation, backed by biomechanical stress analysis," I corrected. "A unique neurotoxin, designed to induce rapid cellular decay, mimicking the effects of a severe stroke or heart attack. It left behind specific biological markers in Finch's tissues, markers that standard toxicology screens would miss, but which my advanced proteomics identified." I displayed a magnified image on a portable screen, highlighting the distinctive protein signatures. "A signature I traced back to your research facility, a project you oversaw, codenamed Chrysalis." Her composure finally fractured, if only for a fleeting second. A tightening around her eyes, a barely perceptible clench of her jaw. There are many such projects. To extrapolate from a protein signature to a murder weapon is a leap. "When combined with the method of delivery," I countered, leaning slightly over the table, meeting her gaze directly. "An airborne dispersal, localized to Shee's study, triggered by a remote signal. The microscopic residue of the dispersal agent, found on the ventilation filters, matched the unique composition of your firm's experimental atmospheric diffusers. Petrova coincided precisely with a remote access log from your personal device, accessing Finch's smart home network for a mere 17 seconds. Just enough time to activate the system, release the toxin, and erase the primary log." Her lawyer interjected, "Circumstantial. Remote access doesn't prove anything, and the filters could have been contaminated." "Contaminated with a substance manufactured exclusively by her company and only found in experimental quantities," I clarified. "But I understand your skepticism. After all, you designed this crime to be untraceable. You accounted for every macroscopic detail, every standard forensic sweep. You believed you had left no path back to you." I paused, letting my words hang in the air. The lead detective watched, his expression grim. Petrova's calm facade had developed a hairline crack. Her eyes narrowed, searching mine, trying to find the flaw in my argument. So thorough, in fact, that you overlooked the truly microscopic. The things you never thought to clean because you believed them impossible to detect. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulling out a small, sealed evidence bag. Inside, nestled on a piece of white filter paper, was a decorative silver lapel pin. A stylized hummingbird, no bigger than my thumbnail, her eyes fixed on the pin. For the first time, I saw genuine shock register on her face. A jolt that momentarily wiped away her carefully constructed composure. This pin, holding the bag up, a gift, I believe, from she himself years ago. And it carries a secret. I held her gaze, watching the realization dawn. A unique peptide chain, a constituent of your chrysalis neurotoxin, but with the custom-calibrated mass spectrometers and the proprietary spectral analysis algorithm I developed, its distinct fingerprint was undeniable. Her face was a mask of disbelief. Then dawning horror. Her perfectly poised shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. "That's impossible." Her voice thin, barely audible. "Petrova," I corrected, my voice firm. Even the most careful transfer leaves behind residue. A microscopic aerosol, perhaps, from the activation. Or a slight transfer when you prepared the device. It clung to the intricate filigree of this pin, a metal that binds certain organic compounds with surprising tenacity. You believed it was clean because no one would ever think to look for that specific trace, on that specific item, with that specific level of sensitivity. The lead detective stepped forward, his hand resting on the table. "Petrova, the pin was found in your personal effects during the search warrant executed this morning. The unique neurotoxin you developed, the one that killed Finch, is on your person. Your untraceable crime, it seems, left one final, undeniable trace." Her icy gaze dropped from me to the pin, then to her own hands, as if she could suddenly see the invisible stain. Her icy gaze dropped from me to the pin, then to her own hands, as if she could suddenly see the invisible stain. The confidence, the serenity, had evaporated, replaced by a profound, chilling emptiness. The portable money counter, tucked into a corner of the stark desert safe house, continued its rhythmic whir-click-whir, a perverse soundtrack to the unraveling of a meticulously crafted lie. A fracture point consistent with extreme rotational stress, not a simple forward impact. The kind of stress that could be induced by a sudden violent jolt to the skull, delivered with incredible precision, causing the brainstem to twist. A pin, small enough to be swallowed, yet large enough to cause that internal microtrauma upon impact, before being quickly absorbed or excreted. She didn't look up, but her jaw tightened. The faint scent of ozone still clung to the air from the money counter, mingling with the dry mineral tang of the desert seeping in through the vents. And the biological residue on that pin, pressing my advantage, was not human. It was a synthetic protein, designed to mimic a specific neurotransmitter, one that would induce a sudden, powerful muscle spasm. A full-body convulsion, precisely timed to coincide with a stumble. Enough to send a man over a railing, but not enough to be detected in standard toxicology screens. You didn't just push him, Dr. Yu orchestrated his very fall from the inside out. A low, guttural sound escaped her throat, a sound of fury and defeat. "He was going to sell it," she hissed, finally lifting her eyes, not to me, but to the barren wall behind me. It was my legacy, my research. He saw only profit. "So you took matters into your own hands," not asking. "You administered a fast-acting bioengineered agent, likely disguised as a supplement, to trigger a convulsion at a predetermined moment. Then you waited for the fall, knowing the microtrauma would be masked by the larger impact and would dissipate rapidly. Almost. The money counter paused its counting, then started again, a new stack of bills feeding through its hungry maw. The sound was almost deafening in the sudden intensity of her confession. To protect the world from his greed, I had to sacrifice him. You saw what no one else would bother looking for. The heavy thud of boots on the gravel outside preceded the sharp rap on the metal door. The detective entered, his face grim, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. He surveyed the scene, his eyes lingering on Dr. Petrova's slumped form, then on the humming money counter. Petrova, his voice devoid of emotion. "You're under arrest." As the officers moved in, their movements efficient and practiced, she offered no resistance. Her shoulders sagged, her meticulously coiffed hair now slightly disheveled. The desert wind, dry and relentless, rattled a loose pane in a window. I stood there for a long moment, the adrenaline slowly draining from my system, leaving behind a profound weariness. The ingenuity of the crime was breathtaking in its depravity. To engineer a weapon that could be swallowed, cause a precise internal trauma, and then vanish without a trace. It spoke to a mind of incredible scientific brilliance. Twisted by a dangerous conviction, the accident was a masterpiece of biological and mechanical manipulation, designed to fool even the most thorough investigation. But I had looked for what wasn't there, for the absence of evidence that screamed louder than any obvious wound. My eyes drifted to the stacks of currency beside the counter. Her motive, she claimed, was altruism, to prevent a global catastrophe. Yet here, in this remote hideaway, was the undeniable evidence of her true objective. A payout, likely for the very bioweapon she claimed to be protecting. The price of her ingenuity wasn't just Xi's life, but her own integrity, her freedom, and the scientific principles she once championed. Finch would get his justice. And Dr. Butt, as I stared out at the vast, indifferent desert, the horizon shimmering under the unforgiving sun, I knew this was just one battle won. New challenges would emerge, new layers of deception, new forms of scientific malice. I always had to be.